somehow I sort of relax, I sort of accepted myself the way I am. But of course I wanted to have more shape.
The world remembers Audrey Hepburn as the woman who defined grace, elegance, and timeless beauty. The icon in pearls, sipping coffee outside Tiffany's, smiling like nothing in the world could ever touch her. And we all know her famous words, "The best thing to hold on to in life is each other." But what if that line wasn't just poetic? What if it came from deep personal pain? Because behind that dazzling smile and picture-perfect image was a life filled with quiet suffering, fear, and heartbreak that most fans never knew about. While the world applauded her charm, she was fighting battles in silence. And now, years later, her own son has finally shared emotional truths that change how we see Audrey forever. So, what did we all miss? What was really happening behind the spotlight? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear reveals a side of Audrey that is rarely talked about, and it may break your heart. Audrey Hepburn's early years were marked by both privilege and deep emotional wounds. Born on May 4, 1929, in Brussels, Belgium, she grew up traveling across Europe, learning 6 languages and living what many would call a dream childhood. From the outside, it looked glamorous, refined, almost fairy tale perfect. But beneath that polished surface was a painful truth that shaped her entire life, a truth that would follow her into adulthood, into fame, and even into motherhood. And it all began with a loss no child should have to endure. At just 6 years old, Audrey Hepburn learned a heartbreak that would quietly follow her for the rest of her life. One day, her father, Joseph Victor Anthony Ruston, walked out on her and her mother and never came back. No warning, no goodbye, just absence. Years later, Audrey would admit, "It was one of the great traumas of my life." And it wasn't something fame, beauty, or success could ever erase. The loss of her father wasn't a wound that healed with time. According to her son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer, even as the world saw a glowing movie star, inside, Audrey still carried the pain of that little girl who had been left behind. It shaped her relationships, her fears, and the way she loved. Decades later, in 1964, Audrey made a decision that showed just how deep that hurt still ran. She went searching for her father. She eventually found him in Dublin, Ireland. They reunited. They saw each other face to face after all those years, but they never spoke about why he left. Not once, and that silence said everything. The pain was so deep that even finally meeting him couldn't repair what had been broken. Her son later said she never truly got over losing her father, never truly let it go. That childhood trauma stayed with her, leaving a mark that even worldwide fame couldn't erase. And as if that heartbreak wasn't enough, the world soon gave her another reason to suffer. When Audrey was just 10 years old, World War II began. She was living in the Netherlands with her mother when the Nazis occupied the country and daily life became a fight to survive. There was fear, there was danger, and there was hunger. Constant, brutal hunger. Food shortages were so severe that Audrey became dangerously malnourished. The slim figure people later admired on screen wasn't a beauty standard. It was the result of starvation, a reminder of what her body had been forced to endure as a child during the Dutch famine. Her son, Luca Doty, later shared the grim details of how she survived. Audrey ate whatever she could find, nettles, tulip bulbs, anything that might keep her alive for another day. She became so weak that she weighed only about 88 pounds, even though she stood nearly 5'6". Her body was fragile, exhausted, and fighting just to hold on. So while the world would later see elegance, grace, and glamour, what they never saw was the little girl shaped by abandonment and war, learning how to survive long before she ever learned how to shine. She didn't just survive the war, she barely escaped it. By the end of the war, she was very close to death, her son Luca later recalled. But heartbreakingly, the suffering didn't stop when the fighting ended. Years of severe malnutrition left Audrey with long-lasting health problems, including anemia, that followed her for the rest of her life. And what haunted her even more was knowing how many others never made it out. Audrey often spoke about the war with quiet tears, comparing herself to those who were lost. She was the same age as Anne Frank, her son later remembered, and that thought alone could bring her to tears. The war never left her. It lived in her memories, in her body, and in her heart. And it became the driving force behind her later humanitarian work with UNICEF, where she spent her final years helping hungry children because she knew that pain personally. She wasn't just showing compassion, she was reliving her own childhood and trying to save others from the same fate. But before the world knew her as a movie star, Audrey had a completely different dream.
She wanted to be a ballerina. Dance wasn't just a hobby, it was her first love, her escape, her hope. Even during the darkest days of World War II, she held on to ballet. In secret, she used her training to perform in hidden dance recitals to help raise money for the Dutch resistance. These performances happened in silence, in shadow, with no applause, no spotlight, only courage. Yet they showed just how deeply she believed in both her art and her country. After the war, filled with hope, Audrey moved to London and won a scholarship to the prestigious Marie Rambert Ballet School. It felt like the dream was finally within reach. But then, reality came crashing down. Despite her passion and relentless effort, she was told the truth she never expected to hear, that she didn't have the technical level or the body type needed to become a professional ballerina. The dream she had clung to through hunger, fear, and war was slipping away. And once again, Audrey had to face the painful reality that even surviving doesn't always mean getting everything you hoped for. She dreamed of being a ballerina, but her own body stood in the way. Audrey Hepburn later admitted she couldn't match the technique of other dancers her age. She was taller than most ballerinas, with larger feet, details that quietly worked against her in the unforgiving world of professional ballet. The rejection was painful, but it didn't break her spirit. Audrey never stopped loving dance. Even as she began starring on Broadway, she continued taking ballet classes, holding tightly to the movement and grace that had shaped her since childhood. That devotion to dance never went to waste. It became the secret behind her magic, the elegance, posture, and fluidity that made her unforgettable on screen. In the end, ballet's loss became Hollywood's greatest gain. Audrey found her true calling in film, where her grace turned into pure iconography. Yet, behind the world's admiration was deep insecurity. Audrey Hepburn is remembered as one of the most beautiful women of all time. From Roman Holiday to Breakfast at Tiffany's, her slim figure, pixie haircut, and bold brows became timeless symbols of beauty. But Audrey didn't see herself that way. According to her son Luca, she often criticized her own appearance, her big nose, her big feet, and how skinny she felt she was. What the world called perfection, Audrey called flaws. With age, however, something changed. She grew gentler with herself. She welcomed wrinkles and gray hair, embracing time instead of fighting it. Unlike many in Hollywood who clung desperately to youth, Audrey found peace in growing older. To her, aging meant freedom, more time for herself, more time for her family, and a deeper understanding of what beauty truly was. She once said, "There's a time for everything in life, even growing old." And according to her son Luca, Audrey Hepburn didn't fear aging at all. To her, it was simply another season, a time to slow down, to focus on what truly mattered: family, love, and giving back. But when it came to love, Audrey's own story was far from simple, and it began not with romance, but with heartbreak. Long before the world knew her as a Hollywood icon, Audrey was just a little girl facing a pain that would follow her for the rest of her life. In 1935, when she was only 6 years old, her father, Joseph Rustin, walked out on her and her mother. Audrey later called it one of the great traumas of my life, and those words weren't an exaggeration. That single moment shaped how she saw love, trust, and relationships forever. Even as she rose to fame and became one of the most admired women on the planet, the longing for a stable family never left her. That deep desire for connection stayed at the center of her relationships, quietly guiding many of her choices. Friends and family would later say she was always searching for the security she lost as a child, searching for the love that disappeared when her father did. Decades later, in 1964, Audrey finally tracked him down, hoping for some kind of closure. They met again in Dublin, Ireland, but the reunion didn't bring the healing she had hoped. They never spoke about the abandonment, never addressed the pain, and according to her son, Sean Ferrer, that wound never truly closed. The sadness remained, lingering quietly beneath her graceful smile. That emotional emptiness would go on to shape her love life, often drawing her towards men who seemed to offer the stability she had always craved, a pattern that led to intense moments of romance and, just as often, deep heartbreak. Just as it seemed like Audrey Hepburn had finally found her fairy tale, she shocked everyone by walking away from it. In 1952, she became engaged to industrialist James Hansen and even called it a love at first sight. But as their careers pulled them in different directions, Audrey made a brave decision. She ended the engagement, saying words that would define her entire approach to love. "When I get married, I want to be really married." For Audrey, romance wasn't enough. She wanted commitment, presence, and a life truly shared. Not long after, fate stepped in at a party hosted by Gregory Peck, where Audrey met actor Mel Ferrer. Their connection was instant and intense. By 1954, they were husband and wife. They even appeared together on screen. But while Audrey's star kept rising, their private life grew more complicated. In 1960, they welcomed their son, Sean, who became Audrey's center of the world and her greatest source of joy. Yet behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Rumors followed the couple, with whispers that Ferrer was overly controlling, earning him the reputation of being Audrey's Svengali. Audrey often dismissed the talk, but close friends claimed the marriage felt suffocating, as if Ferrer ruled with an iron hand. Over time, the strain became impossible to ignore. After 14 years together, the marriage ended in divorce in 1968. Still, even as romantic love slipped away, another kind of love remained unshaken. Audrey's bond with her son gave her strength and purpose, reminding her that love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply changes its shape. And then, when she least expected it, love found her again. After the divorce, Audrey joined friends on a Mediterranean cruise where she met Italian psychiatrist Andrea Dotti. Their connection was swift and powerful, and by 1969, Audrey once again said, "I do," stepping into what she hoped would finally be the lasting love she had always dreamed of. Just when Audrey thought love was finally giving her a second chance, life reminded her how fragile happiness could be. She dreamed of slowing down, building a quiet family life, and maybe even stepping back from the spotlight. In 1970, that dream seemed to come true when she welcomed her son, Luca, a moment that filled her with deep joy and renewed hope. But this new beginning came after years of heartbreak. Audrey had suffered several miscarriages in her life, including a very painful one in 1959 while she was filming The Unforgiven. Each loss left a deep emotional mark on her. She once admitted that these losses hurt her more than anything else she had experienced, even more than her parents' divorce and her father's disappearance. So when Luca was finally born, it felt like a small miracle, proof that after so much pain, joy was still possible. Sadly, this second chance at love didn't come without problems.
During her marriage, the pressure of fame and long periods apart began to strain the relationship. While Audrey was away working, her husband was often unfaithful, reportedly seeing younger women. The betrayal slowly broke the trust between them, and in 1982, the marriage ended in divorce. Even then, Audrey put her children first. She chose to stay in Italy so Luca could still have a relationship with his father. But, as her son Sean later shared, that relationship rarely happened, and Audrey ended up raising both of her sons mostly on her own. Her love stories may have ended in heartbreak, but the role that brought her the greatest happiness wasn't on a movie screen. It was being a mother. And in the quiet moments with her boys, Audrey found a kind of love that fame could never give her. After a lifetime of heartbreak and searching, Audrey Hepburn finally found the quiet happiness she had been chasing all along, and it came when she least expected it. Her final relationship with Dutch actor Robert Wolders brought her a deep sense of peace and stability that had been missing from her earlier years. The two met in 1980, and although they never officially married, Audrey often described their 9 years together as a marriage of the heart. In 1989, she reflected on their time together, calling it the happiest period of her life. Her son Sean later said, "Mum had finally found someone who let her be herself, without the pressures of fame or perfection." With Wolders, she experienced a rare sense of stability, calm, and unconditional companionship. But just as Audrey seemed to have stepped into this peaceful chapter, fate intervened. After returning from a humanitarian mission in Somalia in late 1992, she began experiencing severe abdominal pain. Initial tests in Switzerland failed to provide answers, prompting her to seek care at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. There, doctors delivered the devastating news. Audrey had a rare form of abdominal cancer called pseudomyxomene peritonei. The cancer had silently spread over the years, leaving her little chance of recovery. Audrey underwent surgery and began chemotherapy, but the disease had already advanced too far. Yet, true to her indomitable spirit, she faced her illness with grace. Robert Wolders revealed she wasn't afraid of dying, she was only afraid of the pain. Even in the shadow of death, Audrey's focus remained on others. She continued her work with UNICEF, showing the world that her compassion never wavered. That same year, in recognition of her extraordinary humanitarian efforts, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, an honor befitting a life spent giving selflessly to others. Even in her later life, Audrey Hepburn found the companionship and love she had longed for. Dutch actor Robert Wolders remained by her side until her death in 1993, offering the stability and warmth that had often eluded her in earlier decades. But Audrey's later life wasn't spent on Hollywood sets or under the bright glare of cameras. It was spent in quiet reflection and selfless service, as she devoted herself to helping others as a UNICEF ambassador. The little girl who had once danced in the shadows of war-torn Europe had transformed her fame into a force for compassion, leaving a mark that would outlive any silver screen role. As Audrey's health began to decline, one final wish weighed on her heart: to spend Christmas at her home in Switzerland. Commercial flights were too taxing for her fragile condition, but her dear friend, designer Hubert de Givenchy, would not let her wish go unfulfilled. Arranging a private jet adorned with flowers, he flew Audrey from Los Angeles back to her sanctuary in Tolock, Switzerland. Surrounded by loved ones, her sons, Robert Wolders, and close friends, Audrey celebrated what she later called the most beautiful Christmas I ever had. Even amid her battle with cancer, she savored a rare moment of pure joy in the comfort of home. After the holidays, Audrey's condition worsened. She became mostly confined to bed, venturing only briefly into her garden when strength allowed. On January 20th, 1993, she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 63, leaving behind a legacy far beyond Hollywood glamour. Her funeral was intimate, yet poignant, held at the village church of Tolak Chanis. Attendees included her sons, Robert Wolders, her former husbands Mel Ferrer and Andrea Dotti, and close friends like Gregory Peck and Hubert de Givenchy. Peck honored her memory by reading Unending Love by Indranath Tagore, a fitting tribute to a life defined by grace, love, and enduring kindness. When the world said goodbye to Audrey Hepburn, it wasn't just the loss of a legendary actress, it was the farewell to a woman whose life radiated love, kindness, and unmatched grace. The tribute that followed was nothing short of moving. Flowers poured in from around the globe, including heartfelt gestures from Elizabeth Taylor and even the Dutch royal family, a silent testament to how deeply Audrey had touched so many hearts. Her final on-screen appearance couldn't have been more fitting, an angel in Steven Spielberg's Always. It seemed the perfect closing chapter for a life devoted to compassion, a spirit that continues to inspire generations. After her passing, Audrey was posthumously honored with the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award at the 1993 Oscars, recognizing the immense impact of her humanitarian work. But to truly understand Audrey's legacy, one only needs to see it through the eyes of her son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer. In a recent interview, Sean opened up about the struggles his mother faced and imagined how she might have embraced today's world. He said with a smile, "Audrey was the queen of Instagram before Instagram existed, more photographed than anyone else, yet every picture captured her grace. Her charm was never just about beauty, it was about connection. As Audrey often said, it's the tune, not the words. How you make people feel mattered far more than the words you spoke, a lesson in empathy and presence that still resonates today." Sean, along with his half-brother Luca, now safeguards Audrey's image and legacy. Together, they ensure that the woman who inspired millions continues to be remembered with the dignity and respect she so rightly deserves.
Sean often stumbles across old photographs of his mother, and he's struck by the thoughtfulness behind each shot. But for him, Audrey's true legacy isn't captured in the glimmer of her fame, it's in her humanity. He wants the world to see the real Audrey, the woman who survived the horrors of war, endured deep personal pain, and still found the strength to give back through her humanitarian work. She's the girl from across the landing who puts on a little black dress, Sean said, a wonderful package of imperfections, and it's those imperfections that made her so relatable and still captivate people today. To share Audrey's story with younger generations, Sean co-authored a children's book, Little Audrey's Daydream. This story begins with her childhood during World War II, a time when Audrey had to stay in bed to conserve energy because of food shortages. It follows her rise to stardom and concludes with her selfless charity work, aiming to inspire children with her resilience, determination, and ability to find beauty even in life's darkest moments. Behind the glamour, Audrey's life was often filled with struggles most never knew. Sean revealed that one of her hardest battles was with miscarriages. She longed for children but suffered several losses, including one devastatingly close to full term. She often spoke about the pain of those losses, Sean shared, saying they were harder for her to bear than anything else, even more than her parents' divorce or her father's abandonment. Audrey Hepburn's elegance may have graced the silver screen, but it was her courage, compassion, and unspoken struggles that truly define her legacy, a legacy Sean is determined to keep alive. What if the glamorous Audrey Hepburn we all know wasn't just a Hollywood icon, but a woman who turned unimaginable pain into a lifetime of love and humanitarian work?
Sean, her son, often reflects on how deeply his mother's struggle shaped her. He believes that when Audrey finally had him, it wasn't just the fulfillment of her dream to become a mother, it was a way to heal from the losses that haunted her. Audrey's hardships began long before fame. Growing up in Nazi-occupied Netherlands during World War II, she endured hunger, fear, and deprivation. Sean recalls how Audrey would share stories of harsh winters when her mother kept her in bed to conserve energy. Those early experiences of suffering didn't break her, they ignited a compassion that would define her later life. Her childhood struggles inspired her lifelong dedication to helping others, especially through her work with UNICEF. The hunger and hardship she experienced firsthand gave her a unique empathy for children in need, and she spent her final years tirelessly working to ease their suffering. Even when she was faced with her own personal battles, diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, Audrey never stopped giving. Her grace wasn't just surface-level charm, it was a strength forged in resilience, a capacity to endure hardship, and a drive to pour love into the world despite her own pain. Sean's reflections give us a rare glimpse of the real Audrey Hepburn, a woman of profound kindness, courage, and humanity. Behind the black dresses and red carpet glamour was a mother, a survivor, and a humanitarian whose legacy continues to inspire generations.